Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this session about supporting your ideas. When we talk about supporting ideas, we're talking mainly about doing research, which brings us to our quote. If we knew what it was, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? From Albert Einstein. Research is incredibly important, and anything we write and anything we do, we need to do a lot of research on it. I'm a screenwriter. And even when I'm writing a fictional story, I still do a lot of research because I want to make sure that it's correct and I want to make sure it's believable. And that's in fiction. So when we're talking about nonfiction, we are talking about a ton of research. Research is incredibly important. It needs to be done at all stages. And we need to make sure that we tell the audience that we've done the research and where we found the research from. So, different types of research. First is personal testimony. Don't be afraid to draw from your own experiences. It enhances your credibility. If you say that you have that experience, then people will maybe view you as more credible. Well, they should, because you know about the topic, you've experienced the topic, you care about the topic. You can convey your insight and emotion regarding the topic as well, and making your speech a lot more memorable. So, again, giving information to the audience and letting them, making it personal, making it kind of who you are as a credible source for this. So, personal testimony is one way to approach this. Another way is to do interviews. So you talk to experts about it, you get their testimony, somebody who's an authority in this subject, and not somebody who's just, oh, they've done a little research on it. If they've done research on it, then you can go out and find that research. We want someone who is the highest authority that you can get. Um, if for any kind of interview, it's always best to arrange it in a time that works best for them. I actually have some more information about interviews itself, but interviews need to be with somebody who knows this subject better than anybody else does. Now, I come from a journalism background, and in journalism, we do interviews a lot of times, one, to gain knowledge, but two, and the most important part is we're trying to get sound bites. It's very important to pick up sound bites for TV, for radio, for written, however that happens to be put out into the world. But when we're doing academic research, that's completely different. Anything that you can find ahead of time, you need to find ahead of time. So if you can find a piece of information about someone before you talk to them, then that's another question you don't have to ask. You want to use your time effectively. You want to use it as you want to be as efficient as you can with that person's time. So when I did my master's thesis, I did it on a film, and I had done all the research in the world that I could on this film. I listened to director's commentary. I've read books. I had read all this information about the director and about how they made the film. And I still had questions. I still had things I just didn't know about the film and how what went into that. So I finally, at the very end, after I'd done exhaustive amount of research, I got a call with the director and we talked for a little bit and he answered the questions of things that I just couldn't find anywhere else. That's the kind of research that we do. So you need to exhaust all the research that you can, all the resources before you do an interview with somebody. If you do an interview with someone, you always want to be prepared ahead of time. Do your research, do your homework. Again, if you can find it somewhere else, don't waste the person's time. So do your homework ahead of time. Look for it in literature first. Prepare good questions. They need to be clear, focused, and open. Open questions are not yes or no. They have to be answered with multiple words or sentences. And if you're using equipment, make sure you always have equipment. Check it ahead of time. You don't want to be wasting their time. When you're doing the interview itself, right before, you want to arrive on time or early with enough time to kind of set up if you need to get your equipment out or if you need to get your notepad out, whatever you need. Thank them for spending their time with you. State the subject and the purpose of the interview and why you want to get the information, and then ask them for permission to record the interview. While you're conducting the interview, try to take notes as best you can, but don't don't lose a lot of eye contact with them. Don't want to You don't want to look too busy while you're with them. So if you need to take notes, go ahead and take notes, but try not to lose any time with the person and not lose any focus with them either. So start with your prepared questions, but if they start to deviate away from that and you feel like that information is important, then go with it. Um, if they do start deviating away and it's just kind of worthless information, then try to bring them back in a nice way. When you're done, thank them, ask them for a follow-up, ask for permission to quote them. I would do all this while I was recording. That way you have proof that you had that you have their permission. And then as soon as the interview is done, you write down all the information that you can think of while it's fresh in your mind. And always send them a brief thank you. No, they always will appreciate that. Okay, next up, we're going to look at more of secondary sources. So those are more primary sources. Now, for really anything that I do in my classes, we don't do primary um, research. We just don't do it because there's a lot of um, there's a lot of hoops that you need to jump through in order to do primary research in an academic setting. So we just don't do it. But you may do it a lot in the real world. So what we're going to take a look at is secondary sources, which is what we use. First is library resources. Librarians, I don't know if you know many librarians. I've had a lot of librarians come to my courses. Librarians absolutely love to answer questions. They love the library, they love the books, they love research, they love that stuff. So if you don't know where to find something, or if you walk in and you're completely confused about it, ask a librarian. They would be more than happy to help you out. We'll talk about books, periodicals, and full text databases. First, when it comes to books, books are great because they have a lot of information about a subject. It's very thick. There's a lot of good information about it. Sometimes that can be a little bit overwhelming because there's almost too much information about it. So that's why a table of contents is really good to help you skim through the things that you need and the things that you don't need. Look for keywords. You can do that, or make sure that you put what you find into context by reading everything around it as well. So the pros again about books is usually you have to uh, have a you kind of have to have credentials. There's a lot to go into making a book. So books a lot of times can be credible, but not always. So and there's a lot of information in books, which is great as well. The downside of books is one, it's not always timely because books take a long time to get produced, written, and published. So they're not always timely, and there can just be a lot of information there. You could read a whole book and realize that all that you wanted is not, nothing that you wanted is actually in that book. So. So that's books. Next up is periodicals. We'll talk about two different types of periodicals. First is scholarly journals, which are aimed at experts in a particular field. Great thing about periodicals is they are not for profit. They are not making money off of them, which is good. So they're not trying to sell ads. They're almost always acceptable research because they are typically documented, usually documented, peer-reviewed, and written by experts. So scholarly journals are good. Journal of the American Medical Association, the Harvard Law Review, Quarterly Journal of Speech are all very credible sources. But one great thing about scholarly research is a lot of times there's not an agenda to it. It's just people wanting to answer questions and learn about something. On the other hand, popular general interest periodicals or journals, they are usually are for profit. Now, some of the benefits of them is that they're pretty mostly timely, so you can get a lot of that information within a short amount of time of whatever happened. They are uh, there's it's usually not information overload, like you know what you're going to get out of it. Um, some of the tough parts is that most periodicals, most of these general ones, are for profit. So people are trying to make money off of them, um, which means they're trying to sell ads. And a lot of times when they're trying to sell ads, they may pull their punches, or they may just kind of give the audience what the audience wants rather than giving the audience what is the most unbiased. So you have to be very careful with them. Some good ones are The Atlantic, Women's Health, New York Times, National Geographic, typically well accepted. Full text databases are these databases you usually find within the library that are sorted by specialization, sorted by just whatever subject that you're trying to find. Uh, they are they're nice because a lot of them have a oh shoot, what it's called. They'll have like a paragraph or a summary of it, so you kind of know if it's important or you know if it's the information you need or not. You can use internet. You got to be really careful with it. You've got search engines, defining search terms, websites, and then government documents can all be found on the internet. Search engines, uh, when you're looking for information on the internet, it's a great place to start. But you got to be really careful with it because sponsored links or links that are sometimes near the top of like Google will not be credible or may not be credible. They're paid to be there. So it doesn't mean they're the best. That just means they spent money to be where they are. So you have to be careful with it. Google Scholar, though, typically has some credible sources, and the Google Books kind of can help you find books without having to read the entire book. You can kind of skim through it. Internet resources, defining search terms. I would say I do not ever condone using Wikipedia, but a great place to start could be Wikipedia because that'll help you learn what terms are used in whatever field you're researching, and then you can go search those terms. So it's a decent place to get just kind of learn more about the subject and maybe get some keywords and search terms for the subject, but that's it. Then you move on and you never go back. So I never, ever, ever want to see Wikipedia used as a source. It's just not credible. It's usually got great information, but you need to find that information somewhere else. Websites, most websites are created to promote the interest of their owner. So it's important that you check to see whose website that you're looking at. You need to do research on it. And then government documents, United States government's the world's biggest publisher. They publish mostly science, engineering, and business. So just some scenarios here. I'll go through a couple of them, but you can always pause and take a look at it later. What theories behind this process or technique? You might use encyclopedias, handbooks, journal articles. What's the history of this phenomenon? Encyclopedias, handbooks, maybe some websites. How is a current situation expected to change? Articles. Some experts might write discussion boards or blogs. Um, a lot of times people think discussion boards and blogs are not good to use as credible sources, but they could be. You just have to do the research on who's writing them and what they are, where they're coming from. And here's some more as well. So if you want to Get a screen grab of that. So when you're conducting other ways of conducting secondary research, using social media and other interactive resources, must be extra cautious in evaluating and documenting these sources. You can use discussion forums, wikis, but again, you've just got to be really careful with those. Blogs, but blogs are not always independent sources. So again, be careful with them. Do the research on whoever has written it. Tagged content and then RSS feeds. So when you're evaluating your source, which you should evaluate pretty much every source, some of them you can evaluate pretty quickly. If you got it from a library database, then chances are it's fine. But if not, then you may need to evaluate it. So first is for accuracy, evidence from reliable source that is quoted carefully in context. Compare the information with information that you find from other sources. Make sure that information that you find from other sources doesn't have the same source as this information does. It needs to kind of be more diverse. Credibility, the trustworthiness of the source. You can begin by checking a source's credibility by determining where a book or article was published. If it's university press, typically it is peer reviewed. If it's commercially published book, then you've got to do more research on it because people could have, um, it could have just published it themselves. So be careful with that. And then determine how well respected the source is by reading reviews and written by critics. Objectivity, uh, a source that is not unduly influenced by personal opinions. This one's tough because everything is going to be objective, but you want to try to find the least objective that you can find. So find a source with the least bias possible. You should recognize that bias exists and ask yourself whether a writer's assumptions are justified by the facts or are simply a result of emotional and preconceived ideas. A lot of social media, that's what you get. Look for a writer's choice of words and see if the language is slanted. Get in the habit of asking yourself whether you're being offered a legitimate point of view or simply being fed propaganda. Happens a lot. So if we're looking at objectivity, here's a good place to start. National Review, which is a very far right magazine. This was the week that Bush was leaving the presidency, and you got him with his shoulders back, and he's walking off into the sunset with his little dog, like a cowboy would. And this would be the New Yorker, who's a lot more left-leaning portrayal of George W. Bush. And just to be objective, here's what the New Yorker post was for right after the inauguration of Obama, and this was the National Reviews of Obama. So you can see very different stances on both these presidents. Currency is just is the information up to date? If it's online, typically it can be up to date because things happen so quickly online. If it's published in a journal that or a magazine, then a lot of times it won't be as up to date. If it's in a book, then it can be a lot further back. It could be not as current. Which, again, if you're studying like the French Revolution or the Civil War, then reading a book is probably, even reading a book that's 100 years, 120 years old, is probably more credible than a book that was written this year. I've got a couple books of soldiers fighting in the war, or Ulysses S. Grant's memoir, where you can read what their firsthand accounts are. Now that's way more credible than something that a historian could publish this year. So you have to watch for that, but it's not always an easy thing. These were the two covers of the article of the Time and the New Yorker the week that COVID broke and the world shut down in 2020. So they were, I think it's International Women's Month. And so that was their focus. There was probably a little bit of information about COVID in it, but these were actually published after the world had shut down. So, timeliness. Comprehensiveness. Does it cover this subject in sufficient depth? Is there enough detail? Does the source include background information that you need to understand the discussion? Does the source mention other important sources that discuss your subject? Are facts and interpretations supported by other sources that you've read, or are there major points of disagreement? And does the author include documentation? Last is the authority. What expertise does the writer have? Are they objective? But also, what is their authority on this? If they teach English at a university, but it's about whatever their writing is um, about history, about history of the Civil War. It's like, well, they are a a faculty member, but it doesn't mean that they're a faculty member in the subject that they're talking about. So be careful with that. You are only as credible as the sources that you use. Okay. None of us are really authority on anything. So we're basing our authority on the sources that we use. When you're citing your sources, make sure you understand the style guide. Plagiarism, whether intentional or unintentional, is presenting someone else's work as your own. Omitting oral attribution during a speech is plagiarism. So if you don't verbally cite your sources according to National Geographic or according to Harvard researcher Dr. Smith, if you don't use those, that's plagiarism. Here's some great ways for you to verbally cite your sources. Um, it's the written version and then how it would be done oral version. So again, you can pause and take a look at those. All right. If you have any questions or anything on that, feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to chat with you about any of that. But that's a little bit about research.